All right, guys. So if you want to flip with me to Genesis, chapter 29. I think last week, if I remember correctly, I think we stopped at verse 30. Jordan, I think you read last week, didn't you? Verse 30, is that where we stopped? All right, I forgot to mark it, and then as I was studying, I was trying to remember how far we made it. I didn't realize how, I mentioned to Kenny, I was like, man, I was exhausted. I didn't realize how much my wife's surgery, how much that took a toll on me. And I didn't get cut open. But thank you for all your prayers. And my shot or nerve ablation seems to have been a success. So thank you very much for all the prayers. Will you go ahead and read the rest of that chapter for me, Jordan?
When the Lord saw that Leah was in love, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, "The Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me." Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also." And she called his name Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Therefore his name was Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Now will praise the Lord." Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing.
Thank you, Jordan. So last week we looked a little bit, we discussed quite a bit, the kind of the difference in between the two wives, in between Leah and Rachel. My goodness, I wanted to call her Rebecca. We looked at the difference in between Leah and Rachel. And some of the difference you see if you study the Israelite history is in the lineage difference. Here we have some notable, the Levites, right? Judah, the Lion of Judah, Jesus. So you've got the lineage of David, you've got the lineage of the Christ, all from Rachel. We don't, if you study some of Leah's, all from Leah, I apologize. If you study some of Rachel's lineage, you see rebelliousness, you see idol worship, two very kind of differences. Maybe I'm putting too much on her, but it's interesting though, because Rachel brings idolatry into this relationship, and we might get there and see that tonight. So it's telling. And of course, the other thing we talked about was, will Jacob ever find peace? And we looked at Leviticus 18:18. And when you read later on in Genesis some of the things Jacob says, it doesn't sound like he really ever did have peace, at least not to me. When he talks about his life and how he toiled, and when you look at some of the things that happened to his sons and the hardship he went through there, this guy had a lot of strife. And in my humble opinion, a lot of it started because he took a second wife. Can somebody continue reading? Let's read. Actually, we're going to need to read chapter 30, 1 through 22. And the most important thing in this is going to be the lineage. Here we're going to get introduced to 11 of the 12, including what we just read, we're going to be introduced to 11 of the 12 tribes. And Benjamin being the last one that will come in later chapters. Who wants to do some reading for me? Go ahead, Micah. Mike, I tell you what, Micah, just split it up some. Why don't you read for me 10 verses and then pass to Philip? Do you mind reading, Philip? Can you do 10 verses too? You don't want to? All right, give me 10 verses and we'll pass to whoever else wants to read. Micah, you got to read aloud so the mic picks you up, buddy. Didn't you read all the way through the end of the chapter? Hey, pick it up in chapter 30, verse 1, Micah.
Okay. And Rachel saw that she was barren, Jacob no children. Rachel conceived her sister, said unto Jacob, Give me children alongside I. And Jacob answered was kindled against Rachel, and he said, Am I in God's stead, who hath withheld thee from the fruit of the womb? And she said, Behold my maid Bilhah, go in unto her. And she shall bear up my knees, that I may have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah her handmaid to wife, and Jacob went in unto her. And Bilhah conceived and bare Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God hath judged me, and paid. Also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore called she his name Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again and bare Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, With great wrestling have I wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had left barren, she took Zilpah her maid and gave her Jacob to wife. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a son. And Leah said, A truth cometh, and she called his name Gad. And Leah's maid bare Jacob a second son. And Leah said, Happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed, and she called his name Asher.
All right, let's pause there. Thank you, bud. So, you recognize these names? They're the names of what?
The tribes.
The tribes, that's right. So they're Israel, or Jacob's sons, but they're the tribes of Israel. And what would Jacob later be called, Micah? Israel, yeah. They would call him Israel, exactly. Good job. What did Jacob get mad about?
Well, he got mad because he said, I haven't been the one that closed your womb. Why are you yelling at me?
That's right. He said, am I God? Am I God? As I was reading this account, this last time, maybe it's my different perspective now. I'm a little bit older. I've got a son who's going to be starting college soon. I wondered, it seems like Jacob, as you read his story, as you read the account and how Israel was started, he seemed to grow closer to God. Did his wives? Did the handmaids? Did his children? You see where I'm going with that? As I read through this and I thought about the choices that he made and the lack of peace in his life, I just wondered is it possible for me to be stumbling closer to God and not be a good leader to my wife and to my son? And that just really struck me this time. I wondered, because of some of the decisions he's made, God is gracious with him. God is keeping his word. And God is continually going and meeting him where he is and helping him move closer and closer. But man, I married 2 wives. Okay, that's bad enough. And now I'm going to take the maid? What type of love language do I have? I mean, this is radically different than life today. There had to be a severe lack of intimacy beyond sex, a severe lack of emotional intimacy with these women and potentially with the kids. Because every little boy loves his mom. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. Jacob, it was clear that his choice was Rachel.
Right.
But now as we see things unfolding, that closeness does not seem to be evident.
Not at all. Not at all. And the Bible's very clear. He loves her very much. But you're right. As a matter of fact, as we continue reading, let me not jump ahead. I'm jumping ahead too much. Do you have a thought, Katie?
Well, yeah, women at this time were greatly judged by their ability to have fair children. And so this phrase of having a child on my leg, meaning my handmaid has the baby, but the baby touches my leg first. And that makes it my child, not hers, that birthed the child.
That's really weird.
Yes. But that was kind of the standard at that time. So it's definitely not something that we see taught from God. But again, it's Rachel's the one that's doing this
Right.
practice.
Right. And we're going to see some more in this chapter that's not taught from God. But it's interesting, and in some ways, it gives us hope. Because I've done a lot in my life that's not taught by God. And thank goodness we serve a gracious Father who will forgive. And so that we have the opportunity to move ahead and to change and to learn better and hopefully not to repeat the same negative cycles over and over again. Yes, ma'am.
Well, it doesn't really sound like they're in the same tent. It sounds like they're in the same area, not because
Yes.
as we keep reading and stuff, it's like Leah goes out and says, "You have to come with me tonight." You have to come with me. So there's a definite separation. She says, "Is it a small matter for you to take my husband?" So Leah says to Rachel, and so she's hurting and stuff from that. But Leah, God notices and watches. And it's like every time she names them, she thanks God for that. So I kind of like Leah stays closer because she's trying to be loved to God because she's trying to be loved like Jacob. And then Rachel just wants to be not only be loved more by Jacob, but to be held in higher esteem by everyone else. Leah also.
There does seem to be some vanity there. Now, you just made me think of two things. When I was reading this, I wondered if Leah's mindset changed a little bit when she was naming the kids, and it was, hey, maybe now my husband will love me, and it changed. It seemed to transform from, hey, maybe now my husband will love me to, I'm going to praise God. And I wonder if the Bible's presenting that on purpose, or if I'm reading too much in. I can't say. The other thing, I just lost it. You made me think there. You're right, a total lack of intimacy. But God seems, that's it, God's compassion. Just like God never forgot Leah, God absolutely never forgets Jacob. And we're going to see that in the dealings with Laban. It's amazing that he's just so compassionate. Just like he looks, because he looks at Leah and he goes, I haven't forgotten you. We see him do the same thing with Jacob. So we're seeing a characteristic of our Lord, that he is compassionate and that he has mercy on the downtrodden, on the unloved. Who wants to read next? We went through verse 13. One of the teens? Oh, go ahead. You want to read through, let's say, verse 24, please?
Okay. Then Leah said, "Happy am I, for women will call me happy." So she named him Asher. Now in the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. And Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter for you to take my husband? And would you take my son's mandrakes also?" So Rachel said, "Therefore he may lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came in from the field in the evening, then Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. And God gave heed to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, God has given me my wages because I gave my maid to my husband. So she named him Ishkar. And Leah conceived again and bore a sixth son to Jacob. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good gift. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons. And so she named him Zebulun. And afterward she bore a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God gave heed to her and opened her womb. So she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she named him Joseph, saying, May the Lord give me another son.
Thank you. So we have here, it looks like the first recorded prostitution. And it was a guy. And the first recorded pimp was a lady. I mean, she sold her husband for mandrakes. What's a mandrake? Anybody know? This was interesting. I had to look this up because I'm going, wait a minute, what's the big deal about mandrakes? Anybody? It's a member of the nightshade family. It's actually a narcotic. So again, we have something here not being taught by God. You can go look this up and look up the genus and everything that this plant belongs to. And that these are still around today. So too much of this will kill you. But there was a lot of, from the reading that I was doing, there was a lot of folklore, if you will, not godly stuff. And this was considered to be an aphrodisiac. So we can make an assumption, we can infer that perhaps Rachel saw this young man coming with the mandrakes and went, aha, that's her secret. I want those. But it wasn't her secret. It wasn't her secret at all. As I was reading this, I'm going, why? What other reason would she have wanted mandrakes for? So that's what I read, was that, yeah.
I just had another thing to say here. It's like, so Jacob's, following Abraham's example the two, and all the problems and stuff that caused, but obviously that story didn't get told to him or something. Because he's doing the same thing.
Absolutely.
With 2 wives and 2 handmaidens.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we haven't read it yet, but we will read about generational sin, where God talks about how He remembers the iniquity of the father on the son to the 3rd and the 4th generation. But to those who love and serve Him, He remembers it for thousands of generations. Unfortunately, it usually takes several generations before we go, I need to stop this. Because there's something attractive about sin. Even seeing the damage that it can cause, there was something attractive to Jacob about having multiple wives, about having multiple kids, even with the damage that it caused. And that thus is, I think, the nature of sin. That's why we get hooked.
Yeah. Well, so he was told that he was going to father thousands, and so God tells him that, and then you kind of take it upon yourself to help God along with it.
Great point.
Like, oh, okay, well, I probably need more than 1 wife to do this, because this is what He told me I need to do, to get sons and to be able to, and so a lot of times when you're getting a blessing or something, then you tend to help or think you're helping along when God has it under control.
Great point. Great point. Like they did with the promise of the birthright. Yeah, great point. So He's not doing anything new here.
Charles, I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I don't know if you've looked at it or how closely or whatnot. What do you make with, because Leah goes out, and so she's the one that essentially, bought this and said, okay, now you have to come and lie with me.
Mm-hmm.
And, which obviously was not, authorized by God.
No.
But then you get to verse 17, and it says, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. And Leah said, God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. And it almost sounds like, if you're not careful, I guess, that God's approving of this.
I hadn't thought about that here, but I think that in much of Genesis, when he's going through all this, it's being presented just honestly. It's being presented as it happened.
Right. Well, there are things that are just simply recorded.
Mm-hmm.
That you think we can't draw into any more than what it is. But with God, with this saying, God listened to because this is Moses writing here, that God listened to Leah. You know, it wasn't Leah believing that God was listening to her, but Moses was recording that God, and that's why it was, you know, it's, I don't know.
I think that God, great point, this is off the cuff. I think that God is listening to her need. I don't think it's necessary, and Leo, first of all, he rightly belonged to Leah, but I don't think so much it's approving of the buying of mandrakes. I don't think it's approving of the use of narcotics. I think it's he recognized her need, her hurt, her suffering, and we get a glimpse of this. I'll fast forward just for a minute. Let me see if I can find it real quick. In chapter 31, when Jacob is talking to the daughters about leaving, we get, and this kind of goes to what Stacy Rice mentioned last week about, hey, maybe the ladies didn't have a choice. When you listen to the place they were coming from, I'll pick it up in verse 14. So Jacob's asking the ladies, hey, we need to leave. You know your dad's been cheating me. We're not getting what we're supposed to. We need to leave. And here's their answer. Rachel and Leah said to him, do we still have any portion or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not reckoned by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has also entirely consumed our purchase price. And God, I think, shows Leah and Rachel and Jacob his love and compassion in spite of their sin, just like he does with us. They were sold. They were, I mean, when you listen to the way they talk about it, he's going, Dad sold us to you to make him rich. He doesn't love us. He doesn't care about us. We're slaves to him. And it's kind of a telling, it made me think about what Stacy said when she said, maybe these ladies didn't have a choice. Because Dad basically bartered them like he would sheep or goats. Did you have something, Sabrina?
Yeah, well, it says back in 9 when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing. So since she had always prayed to the Lord and asked him for the children and said, God gave me this child, I think there can be a little inferring that, God, because of where her heart was, hurt her once more and bore another child because she had the circumstances to be able to create that child in that night. There might not have been other circumstances in which she was going to be able to create that child again, because since they both gave their maidens, they're probably not lying in bed with him, which means that no baby can be conceived if there's not a night. And so she sees the moment and was like, maybe I give it one last try. And she does. God says, okay, here you go.
God bless her.
Yeah.
Given, like Katie said as well, given that so much of their worth was based on having kids, this was a huge blessing.
Yes.
A huge blessing. Very different from today. It's hard to, thank you for that question, Nathan. Hopefully I off the cuff kind of did it some justice. That's my take as a whole, though, is that God is showing love. He's showing compassion to them, but also to the people around them who are observing all of this happen. Because remember, he was creating a people to be a light to the world, just like we're supposed to be lights to the world today.
One resounding theme from front to back is God wants the credit. He blesses those that are going to give him the credit for their blessings. Over and over and over and over and over and over again. And seeing here, even though Leah isn't doing necessarily the right thing, even though they're involved in the wrong thing, she is giving him the credit for each one of her blessed sons. And that's what he desires very highly.
Good point. Very good point. Thank you. So we've seen to this point the 11 tribes, right? With Joseph, and then, as you all know, as most of you know, Benjamin will come later. So that's not recorded here. Why is Dinah mentioned?
She's never forgotten.
Huh?
She's never forgotten.
She's never forgotten?
Her father cares for her. You can't really say
very interesting stuff. You know, some of the writings that I read a couple different ones on that. Some folks said maybe it's because of what happened in chapter 34, what's coming up with Dinah. I hadn't thought about that though, about the tribes later. That's a good point. Because some of the thought is it is possible that Jacob could have had other daughters, but Dinah specifically is mentioned because daughters, unfortunately, were not always mentioned at the time. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Usually you don't hear of daughters, and if they are, they're not named. So there had to be a reason. God wanted us to know her name.
Yeah, and I won't spoil that, but we'll see. We'll see in a couple of chapters. Dinah has some unfortunate happenings. Can somebody continue reading for me? Let's read verse 25 through, and long reading again. Let's go through 36. You already read. Josiah, read for me. Loud in prayer, please. What's that?
Chapter 30.
Chapter 30, verse 25, all the way through 36, please.
Now it came about when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own house. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me depart, for yourself know my service which I have rendered you." But Laban said to him, "If now it pleases you, stay with me. I have divined that the Lord has blessed me on your account." He continued, "Name me your wages, and I will give it." But he said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your cow have fared with you. For you had little before I came, and it was increased to a multitude, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. But now when shall I provide for my own household also?" So he said, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything if you will do this one thing for me. I will again pasture and keep your flock. Let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black one among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. And such shall be my wages." What verse?
Through 30, please. 36, I apologize.
"So my honesty will answer for me later, when you come concerning my wages. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and black among the lambs, if found with me, will be considered stolen." Laban said, "Good, let it be according to your word." So he removed on that day the striped and spotted male goats, and all the speckled and spotted female goats, every one with white in it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and gave them into the care of his sons. And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks.
Thank you. In verse 27, this becomes important later. Excuse me. Verse 27. You got the New King James. What does your New King James say, George?
Verse 37 or
27.
And Laban said to him, "Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake."
Okay, that's interesting. So the New American Standard that Josiah just read says, "I have divined." And the reason, again, I'm a slave to the scholars in the Hebrew, but the reason they say that is because literally this word means through divination. So there's some thought, just like Laban had idols that we see Rachel later steals, right? I know I'm fast forwarding there a little bit. There's some thought that he may have been practicing divination because he was clearly doing idol worship. He was involved in other types of things. That's just a word study there, which I thought was interesting because we kind of start seeing two very different behavioral patterns and two very different personalities diverging here, if you will. And all the more reason that Jacob, if he's going to be the chosen people, if he's going to be Israel, needs to get out of this household. He needs to get away, and he needs to follow God. Because what's going to happen if he continues to raise his kids in an environment where there's idol worship with grandpa and divination? Well, it happens over and over again with the tribe of Israel, right? If he continues to mix, his kids are going to kind of follow in grandpa's footsteps. So it's time. It's time for him to leave. And he's starting to work in that direction. Why did Laban agree so quickly to to Jacob's idea about the speckled and spotted?
Because he was already separating all the speckled and spotted. So he thought he could keep most of them pure.
Well, he was going to spot them. Here would be my thought. Probably the speckled and spotted were, and this is given, science knowledge now that they probably didn't have then. He said, let me pass through and pull out all the speckled and spotted. The speckled and spotted were probably the minority. It was probably, by today's standard, I'm totally guessing, I haven't studied this, it was probably a recessive trait. If it wasn't a recessive trait, there would be more speckled and spotted than there were plain. So Laban said, boom, great deal, done. And then did you catch who's taking care of the speckled and spotted? Laban. That's right. So he's going, oh yeah, this is a great deal for me. You take care of my sheep because I'm divine, or by experience, whichever is the case, that whatever you have will be blessed. So he's going, yeah, you take care of mine and I'll take care of yours. Does that sound like a good deal to anybody here? Now, when you continue reading, we find out that an angel of the Lord had talked to Jacob. He didn't come up with this idea on his own. Because I got to tell you, if we were making a deal and I didn't trust you and I was trying to get away from you, I wouldn't be okay with you taking care of my stuff and me taking care of yours. That just doesn't really compute. So there was a God thing going on here. But Laban jumped on it. So absolutely. So Jacob's were taken care of until they were coming to water, were taken care of by Laban's sons. And then Jacob was to take care of Laban's flock. Somebody else for me read. Let's read 37 to the end of the chapter. I want to get through the rod stuff if we have time today. You want to go ahead?
Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white stripes in them, exposing the white which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks in the gutters, even in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink. And they mated when they came to drink. So the flocks mated by the rods, and the flocks brought forth stripes speckled and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the striped, and all the black in the flock of Laban, and he put his own herds apart, did not put them with Laban's flock. Moreover, it came that whenever the stronger of the flock were mating, that Jacob would place the rods in the sight of the flock in the gutters, so that they might mate by the rods. But when the flock was feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. So the man became exceedingly prosperous, and had large flocks, and female and male servants, and camels and donkeys.
Thank you. So, what's up with the rods? Anybody have any ideas on the rods?
Mine says that it helps the animals like come and eat.
Okay. So there are a ton of different ideas you can read about, and a lot of them, some of them are way out there. I found some that were borderline. Man, there was this one on a college website that I came to, not a Christian college website, and it was borderline, let's just say it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. It was borderline dirty. A lot of bad ideas. There's a lot of bad ideas out there. If you continue reading, I'm going to fast forward because we're running out of time. If you continue reading in chapter 31, what you'll see is God told Jacob that he was going to bless the spotted and so forth, that he gave him a vision, and then an angel spoke to him and told him that what was going to happen. That's why Jacob made the deal that he did. Now, there might be, a site I just came along, I haven't had the opportunity, I actually sent Apologetics Press an email. I have not had the opportunity to check the primary sources on this, but there was a Genesis website I found. I can give you the site afterwards if you like. I think it was somethinggenesis.org. I'll find it for you guys. They said that they think it's a God thing from chapter 31, but there could have been, whether this came from God or whether it was an observation of Jacob's, that there was potentially something to the wood. It didn't have anything to do with who would reproduce, because that would have required a lot of genetic understanding, especially for a recessive trait. That would have been tough. But that there is potentially some real health benefits to the type of wood that was listed, and that actually would be released by soaking the wood like a tea in water. And I found that interesting. Again, if you want to read more about it, I can look it up on my phone and find it for you in my email. But the poplar, they basically said that the poplar contains salicin and a large concentration of tannins that when soaked with water would be let out and would lead to better reproductive states, and they would actually eat the wood as well, which would then give them enhanced proteins and carbohydrates, which every mom knows when you get pregnant, what do you start taking? Prenatal vitamins, right? Everybody, they prescribe them if you're not on a good multivitamin. Why? Because a baby takes a lot of building blocks. So there might be something to this poplar wood. The almond wood has been known to treat urogenital disease and disorder. And then this other wood, there was a third type that they thought they call it an oriental plane tree, that apparently is full of antioxidants and is used by humans for its anti-inflammatory effects. So was this just common medicine at the time? Was this good animal husbandry? Was this from God? We don't know. But there are some potential medicinal qualities to these woods that by breaking open the pulp and putting it in the water and the animals eating on it, that they would have benefited or been stronger for breeding. Yes?
New King James calls it a chestnut tree.
Chestnut tree, yeah, you can. There's a couple different translations for it. I'll show you the site. But anyhow, but the big thing, as you keep reading thank you. As you keep reading in chapter 31, the biggest thing, because you read all this different stuff about looking at rods has never, ever scientifically been tied to creating spots or stripes. This seems to be a God thing. God was sending a message as far as who his chosen was, and he was setting up Israel. Does that make sense? Questions, comments before we wrap it up in a prayer?